There came an air of despondence after the broadcast had come to an untimely end, and the kind of unending silence which rings out before calamity. There were no words spoken between us, and even our brief movements as we removed those devices upon our heads made no noise in those moments. Echo had turned her focus to the wine glass in her hands, slowly sipping away at its murky confines. But I could not do the same, for that aromatic wine which once brought momentary peace from my woes now seemed bitter, and the mere thought of consuming another drop of it seemed vile in its own right. My mind was awash with a million different thoughts, all vying for dominance. I knew not what was to occur in the days to come, but I truly feared the worst. For if the humans did indeed had an ancient weapon, they would no doubt be even more on the defensive than they already were. I knew that that council meeting would be nothing more than an attack on the humans, but I never thought it would be one in the literal sense. I reached for my phone and began rifling through it, desperate to find out what had happened in the wake of that meeting. But while there was a lot of buzz and panic over its aftermath, nothing concrete had yet to surface. There was simply no solid statements as to what was to come. "Good thing I didn't go to that meeting then, hey?" said Echo as she reached for the bottle and drank straight from it, caring not for the mess she made upon her chin. "I would not want to be in the middle of that right now." "I feel sorry for your replacement," I said. "They're probably being held up and questioned, like everyone else is, I imagine." "He'll be fine," she said with a nervous laugh. "Asted has been vying for my spot for months now. He should be ready for it." She let out a drawn-out sigh from beside me as she shoved the now empty wine bottle far out of her reach. "So, who do you think did it?" "There doesn't seem to be any statements," I said, as I continued to flip through my phone. "Maybe it's too soon." "No? Who do you think did it?" She moved in closer and stared at me wide-eyed. I found it hard to match her gaze, and so I averted it. Part of me thinks that it could be the Akatan, but I don't think even they would be foolish enough to incur their wrath even further. She let out a coy laugh. "Well, they did declare war on the humans to begin with. I think reasoning is beyond them at this point. Even they know when they're outmatched." There came a buzzing from my phone from beside me, and as I reached for it, I expected to see upon that crystal screen a declaration of war. And as I felt my hearts beat down in my chest, I found those fears unfounded, for what I saw was utterly benign by comparison. "My crews are taking the news well, surprisingly, even the ones with a lot of humans on board," I said as I scrolled through the entirety of the message, written out in more detail than it had to be. I was worried they'd have some issues. As I let out a drawn-out sigh of relief, Echo looked at me with a strange look. "Why don't we go for a little walk?" she said as she stood up in a hurry. "Nobody will be around at this hour. Don't you think it might be a nice change of pace?" She seemed unusually hesitant, but I was eager to take my mind off the troubles at hand, so I saw no reason to refuse. Sure, why not? We left the darkness of my office behind and entered the darkness of the world outside, illuminated by the faint twilight and the two shimmering moons hanging low in the sky. There was a faint breeze about, which whistled through the nearby trees, but it was not cold enough that I considered it a detriment. True to her word, there was not a soul on the streets about, most likely owing both to the late hour and the recent news we had received. There would be many who would be holed up in their rooms, glued to their screens awaiting the next update, and I knew not when that salvation or damnation would come. In comparison to that bleak existence, it was nice in a sense to be out in the open air, for it allowed me to forget those troubles, if only for a moment. We came to a stop just outside a park, where the sweet scent of something strange wafted through the air. But my focus was not on that, but Echo. She had a strangely calm look in her eyes, but even though her gaze was squarely focused on me, it was as if she was not looking at me at all. "What are you going to do if war breaks out?" I thought the point of this walk was to distance ourselves from such matters. She approached me with a faint smile. Did I say that? The gentle winds around us suddenly became far harsher, and I felt my teeth chattering as I stood there idly. But she didn't seem to be affected by it in the slightest, which I thought odd considering her spindly frame. But perhaps it was only ever a matter of age, and I had many years over her. "Even if war does break out," I said, "it doesn't mean we will be dragged into it directly." "But they might blame us for what happened," she said. "Someone was bound to find out what they were up to eventually," I said. "These things don't stay secrets forever. But what if they do blame us? She said, her voice slowly becoming more frantic. What will you do then? I stopped to think about her question for a moment. For while the thought of war did indeed hang heavy on my mind, I did not question the idea that we would be called into it. While we were indeed considered a neutral force in the grand scheme of things, we had in some way played a part in what had unfolded. And in the event that war did break out, we would inevitably assist those who went against the humans in some way, even though we would most likely not be an actual player in the war itself. It was almost inevitable that they would feel betrayed by our actions, but I pushed that thought to the back of my mind for my own sake. She let out a faint sigh. If you're going to run away, can you take me with you? I mean, nobody would blame us if we left, even now. You're rather persistent, I said. Is there something you're not telling me? She averted my gaze and let out a single sobering laugh, which seemed to echo off into the darkness. I don't have long to live, she said as her voice broke for but a moment. The doctors only caught it recently. Her words gave me pause, and I could only say the first thing that came to my mind. I'm sorry to hear that. She reached out for me, and so I held her in my arms as she sobbed into them. I thought about saying something to her, anything at all, but I could not find the words to say in that moment. Whether because it was the cold or the wine, which had taken my thoughts away from me, I knew not. Instead, I simply stood as I were, comforting her in that cold and the dark. I should get going, she said, as she distanced herself from me. My house isn't far from here. Are you sure? She forced a smile, which soon faded away. Yeah, I'll be fine. I saw her off, and she disappeared into the night, fading into the darkness in a matter of moments, like she never was. There came a drawn-out buzz ring out in my pockets, and as I reached for my phone once again, I had lessened my expectations and thought that it was no urgent matter. But as I gazed upon that screen and read that telltale message upon it, I felt a sickness well up from within me. The world around me became cold in those moments, and I could no longer even hear the whistling of the wind around me. My sense of hearing became so numb to everything I could not even hear her approaching me, and only noticed her presence when her claws dug into my back just slightly. She spoke in barely a whisper, nearly drowned out by the whistling winds. Estet did it. My blood ran cold at her words. They're going to come looking for me. She spoke in a fumbled voice, barely able to keep her words from slurring. They're going to think I was involved in this. No, they won't, I said, trying to reassure her. It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. And how long will it take for them to believe that, if ever? She looked up at me with tear-stained eyes, and her once elegant face racked with grief. She sobbed into my arms. Please help me! There was a cold cruelty in the way which she spoke, for she thrust upon me a mission that I knew foolish to endeavor upon. Nonetheless, there had always been a discontent gnawing at me all those years, a sense of apathy for everything I had done and set upon. Perhaps I knew it would do me good to leave it all behind. That grief-stricken world that had brought me so much anguish over the years. The whisk arrives back here in 3 days, I said. You can board that. I'll have them head off to the far sector. And you? I need some time to think about it, I said. You can use the spare room. I'll make sure nobody knows you're here. We headed back to my estate as a sullen pair, for she had lost her usual vigor that she always carried with her. I didn't realize she had been carrying such a burden, for she hid it all too well. Perhaps it was mere proof that I did not know her nearly as well as I should have. As she settled herself in, I found myself wandering back to my office, my heart's heavy and my mind weary. The day before me had been long and arduous, and the days ahead of me would be filled with turmoil too. I took off my coat, which weighed heavy on my shoulders, and slowly made my way over to a side room, blocked off by an ornate door made of a fine white wood. As I opened it, I was greeted by the faint scent of incense, of smoke and lavender. I flicked on the nearby light and slowly walked in as those soft violet lights sprung to life, illuminating the room for what it were. There sat an urn in the middle of the room, surrounded by flowers and picture frames, all of them featuring a single woman, kind and beautiful, radiant and everlasting, the final memories of my late wife. As I knelt down upon the cushion laid out upon the floorboards, caring not for the aches of my legs, I felt my eyes well up just slightly like a remembrance of times past. What am I meant to do now, darling?